in the Dibley Diaries for this week. We're going to be thinking about the passage where Jesus says to Peter, I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom of God. And keys can be a really interesting thing in a rural setting. So over here we have a very kind of traditional lock, which would have had a key this big, which would go in it. And I remember once about to board a flight at Gatwick, getting things out of the car, I suddenly realised that I had a key that big in my handbag still, and I probably should leave that in the car rather than try and explain what it was for at security as we went through. Who has the keys in a rural setting, who looks after the keys, is a really difficult thing. The vicar of somewhere may have a key for each building or may not actually have a key to get into each place, and then there will be various locks and keys that you need within the building itself. Some of those you'll need to access through a key safe. One of the things which has revolutionised church buildings, particularly in rural areas where people would like to keep their church building open during the day but closed at night, is the time lock. Now there are various different time lock devices that you can get. The one for this church building where I'm standing just now is overridden, if you want to, by a tiny little electronic fob, really tiny thing, and you have to place it in the exact right place on this bit of wall. I know. And you have to not only place it in the right place, but at the right angle in order to get in. It took me ages to work it out when I first had to do it. So this week's rural challenge is a very physical, practical one. Keys, what you'll need, how to get in, how to know how to get in, and who has the keys for your church building. The Bible reading for this week's Thought for the Week is from Matthew chapter 16 verses 13 to 20, and it's the time when Jesus is talking to his disciples about who people are saying he is. So he says, who do people say that I am? And the disciples report various different things. I guess it's the first century equivalent of Googling yourself. So some people are saying that Jesus is Elijah, some people are saying that Jesus is John the Baptist, some people are saying that he's one of the other prophets. So Jesus is getting all this feedback from the disciples saying, well, this is who people are saying you are. Although those people are of course dead, the people that the people are thinking he might be. So that's a really interesting question in itself. And then he says to the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah. You are the Messiah. And Jesus says to Peter, God has shown you this. This hasn't come from humans. God has shown you this. And then Jesus goes on to say, I will call you Cephas, or Peter, instead of Simon. His given name was Simon. And on this rock I will build my church. And then Jesus goes on to say, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So there are lots of things going on in this passage. Partly there's the whole thing about the Messiah. Who is the Messiah? What does that mean? Messiah means anointed king. And just in the same way that when a vicar goes to a village, everybody in the village thinks they know what the vicar should be doing. When people are waiting for a Messiah, everybody knows that they think that the Messiah should be doing things in a certain and particular way, and we're going to see that again and again through the stories of the Gospel. So Peter has revealed that he believes that Jesus is the Messiah, the Anointed One, and then Jesus calls him Peter, Cephas, instead of Simon. He gives him that name, and it kind of means Rocky, or the Rock, with kind of less boxing gloves and weightlifting, I guess. And Jesus says, I'm going to build my church on you. Now, I had a quick look at Tom Wright's book, Matthew for Everyone, for this passage and for next week's passage as well. And I was interested that Tom picks up on this idea of the wise man building his house on a rock. So Jesus has this as a teaching about the wise man building his house on the rock, and he says to Peter, "You're the rock, and on you I am going to build my church." 33 years ago, less a few days, I was standing in the centre of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and you know, sometimes when you do things and you don't necessarily know exactly why you do them. I did A-level Latin with 3 science A-levels, and that meant that when I was standing underneath the dome of the Basilica, I could easily read the Latin, which said, "Here is Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." And I mean, I was young, but even then I had a sense of disquiet, thinking, I wonder if they've taken it a bit literally, as I was standing in the largest church building in the world, or one of the largest, certainly. And I had that kind of sense of disquiet. But Jesus wasn't talking about that. Of course, he was talking about the community of the church being built on Peter's strengths and, I guess, Peter's weaknesses. So next week, spoiler alert, Peter and Jesus are going to have words. And it was always a difficult, a tense relationship between Peter and Jesus. Peter was getting it wrong as much as Peter was getting it right, which is a great hope for church leaders who are often getting it wrong as much as they are getting it right. The keys are an interesting symbol of Peter. They're often Peter's keys. I mean, they would be more generic. You could have had a fish, I guess, for Peter, or a rock. A rock is not visually very exciting. But what are the keys for? Jesus says that they are for locking things up and unlocking them. And I guess I've always struggled with this. I mean, what is Peter supposed to lock up, and what is Peter supposed to unlock? But now, with a few more years of experience in church community, there are often things which we need to free, to unlock, to get sorted out, and there are things that we need to keep shut away, safely away, or put them away. So I think that's something which I will think on a bit more about. So this week, we're thinking about Peter, and Peter being the rock on which the church is built, like the wise man builds a house on the rock. I mean, the church didn't really necessarily mean the same thing then as it does now anyway, but Jesus has this encounter with Peter. Peter understands that Jesus is the Messiah, and Jesus knows that Peter will be the person who will be able to build the church community of believers. The Dibley moment for the week this week is about church doors, not this church building door, but another church building door where I used to work. There's a picture book by Lauren Child where the small child in the story goes up to open a door, and then the line in the book actually says, but they couldn't open the door because the illustrator had drawn the handle too high. Well, that was exactly my problem. So I had to go in through a small door with an ordinary key, and then I would have to unbolt the big door. The bolt was so high that I couldn't reach it. In the end, we got round this by letting me stand on a very small, sturdy Sunday school chair that was kept under the table by the door for precisely the purpose of the very small vicar unbolting the door. Every time someone saw me do it, they laughed. That's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week and feel really firmly rooted on your rock.